Billions of dollars vanish in Washington with a single stroke of a pen, and most of the time, nobody ever bothers to ask where it all really goes. But in one explosive hearing, a senator ripped the cover off a system that bleeds taxpayers dry while quietly chipping away at basic liberties. What started as a budget discussion quickly turned into a wake-up call about waste, surveillance, and a government that thinks accountability is optional. This wasn't just politics as usual. It was a rare moment when the math didn't add up, the answers didn't satisfy, and the question struck at the heart of how power really works. The opening salvo was sharp. A request for $46 billion in taxpayer funds was on the table, with the Department of Homeland Security insisting it was necessary for border security.
Everybody knows that's the end. We're going to try to move on to the next person to get you out of here. We talked a little bit about the wall earlier. The administration has asked for $46.5 billion for the wall. The border on the Mexican border is about 1,950 miles. We've fenced or walled about 700 of it. That leaves about 1,200 miles. There's 200 or 300 miles of it that probably never going to have a fence on. It's mountainous or just impossible to fence or wall. So I would say realistically, you got under 1,000. But let's just say there's 1,000. You really want to wall on 1,000. CBP says it's 6.5 million per mile. Your response today was 12 millions per mile. That means $12 billion for 1,000 miles. We're off here by a factor of 3 or 4 with 46 billion. Where's the rest of the 46 billion? The administration says they want 46 billion for a wall. You could pave all of it and still have, 34 billion left over. What's the 34 billion going for?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for the question. We do have 702 miles of wall today. 598 of that are steel. The rest of that is temporary that's in place. Since the president's been in office, over 70 miles has been erected. We have 11 contracts that have gone out and allocated. We also have 5 more that are pending. Based on the dollars that have been requested, it's not just the infrastructure that would be built that would be the actual wall construction. It would be also surveillance equipment.
The number's way off. 1,000. You could do 1,000 miles for 12 billion. You're asking for 46 billion. So I'm one who's not impressed and would have to see more detail as to where the rest of the money goes. We can't just throw $30 billion out there and say things cost a lot.
I agree. We'll get you the specifics on that.
With regard to the drones and all the preparatory work that DHS does and the government does for the NFL and for FIFA, does the NFL pay DHS for the work you do?
Boy, not to my knowledge. I will.
Well, I mean, here's my point. The NFL makes billions of dollars. We're $2 trillion in the hole. I don't care if government shares their technology and government helps out the World Cup. They ought to pay.
Yeah,
people are paying hundreds of dollars for tickets. I mean, thousands of dollars for the NFL, for Super Bowl and things. They're also paying for FIFA. And so these people ought to pay. And so I'm one holding up these authorizations, and I'll let them go forward. But I want people to pay. I mean, it's ridiculous that the average taxpayer who could never afford to go to an NFL Super Bowl has got to pay for their security. Should the government help? If we have technology they don't, perhaps. But they ought to pay. So NFL, FIFA, I think they all ought to pay. And we'll be insisting on trying to put language in that. If you're a for-profit entity and the government's helping you, you ought to pay for it. With regard to TSA Quiet Skies and Tulsi Gabbard situation, I suspect there are going to be other people that were caught up in this thing as well. I'm horrified by the idea that we took a former congresswoman and we're surveilling her and riding on jets with her. There was another story of an air marshal whose wife, might have been at January 6th or something, and now we're, have air marshals following another air marshal or his wife. So I want to hear the whole story of what happened. I want to hear that people have been let go, that they're no longer doing this. If there were abuses of Tulsi Gabbard's liberties, I want to hear from that. But I want repercussions to come from this. And I think you've said something's coming. Please let us know, and let us know how the program the destruction of civil liberties can be minimized. I frankly probably have trouble with the whole program, but let's see if there's some way. But we need significant reform. If it needs legislation, please come to us with that. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Secretary Null, for being here.
But when you break down the numbers, the arithmetic tells a very different story. 1,000 miles of wall construction at the government's own estimates should cost around $12 billion. Yet DHS was asking for nearly 4 times that amount. That left an unexplained gap of more than $30 billion, money with no clear destination. The senator demanded receipts, but what came back was little more than excuses and vague promises to get back with specifics. For anyone watching, it was a reminder of just how easily billions can disappear into the fog of bureaucracy. And as sharp as that moment was, it was only the beginning. Because then came the question nobody in DHS seemed prepared to answer. Why should ordinary Americans foot the bill for billion-dollar sports leagues? The government admitted that DHS provides security support for the NFL, the Super Bowl, and even FIFA's World Cup events. Think about that. These organizations make billions of dollars every year. Tickets for the average fan can cost hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. And yet, the very taxpayers who could never dream of affording those seats are the ones covering the bill for government protection. The senator was blunt. If private corporations are raking in profit, they should be paying their way, not relying on subsidies from people who will never step foot in a luxury suite. It was an argument that cut straight across party lines, because regardless of political belief, who can justify billion-dollar companies leaning on taxpayers for free help? And yet the answers from DHS were weak at best. The hearing only grew more heated when the conversation shifted to something even more alarming than money: surveillance. A little-known program called Quiet Skies had quietly expanded under the radar. Its mission? Monitoring Americans on commercial flights. Not suspected terrorists. Not people on watch lists. Ordinary passengers. Reports suggested that even Tulsi Gabbard, a former congresswoman, was surveilled by federal agents while flying. Air marshals were allegedly assigned to follow her around, documenting her movements. But it didn't stop there. Another account suggested that an air marshal's own wife had become a target because of suspected political affiliations. Suddenly, this wasn't about safety at all. It was about unchecked power targeting whoever the system decided to watch. The senator's outrage was palpable. This wasn't oversight, he argued. This was overreach. Americans never signed up for government agents tailing them in airports or scribbling down notes about how often they visited the restroom. The questions raised were chilling. How many ordinary citizens had been flagged without their knowledge? How many families had been dragged into a dragnet that treated political dissent or even association as suspicious behavior? And most importantly, who was going to be held accountable? The senator demanded answers and promised repercussions. If legislation was required to end abuses, he wanted to see it. If people needed to be fired, he wanted resignations on the record. Anything less, he argued, was a betrayal of the very liberties the country claims to protect. The conversation revealed an uncomfortable truth. When power grows unchecked, both money and rights slip through the cracks. On one hand, DHS was casually requesting tens of billions without itemized detail. On the other, it was quietly using programs to keep tabs on citizens and even elected officials. Put together, the pattern was impossible to ignore. A government that can't or won't provide a breakdown for billions of dollars is the same government that believes it can follow people without a warrant, justification, or consequence. And if that's the system operating behind closed doors, what else don't we know about? It was also a rare reminder that slogans about fiscal responsibility are just that, slogans. Politicians love to talk about tightening belts, cutting red tape, and watching every penny. But when a request like $46 billion slides across the desk, those slogans dissolve. Without pushback, the money moves, the projects balloon, and the taxpayers are left in the dark. What made this moment different is that someone actually stopped and said, "Show me the math." And when the math didn't make sense, the silence from DHS was deafening. The pushback also highlighted a hypocrisy that cuts both ways. Politicians across the spectrum rail against government waste when it suits their message, but when the time comes to scrutinize contracts, hold billion-dollar corporations accountable, or demand transparency in surveillance programs, too often the outrage fades. Here, the hearing exposed the disconnect between talking points and action. It wasn't just about one budget request. It was about whether anyone in Washington still takes oversight seriously. The tension in the room wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the principle. Should the government really have the power to dip into taxpayer wallets without justification? Should billion-dollar sports empires get free security while struggling families pay the tab? Should surveillance programs monitor political figures and ordinary travelers without accountability? The senators' questions didn't solve those issues in a single afternoon, but they forced them into the open where people could no longer ignore them. By the end of the hearing, one thing was clear. This was never just a budget discussion. It was a wake-up call. Billions of dollars remain unaccounted for, surveillance programs operate in the shadows, and the average taxpayer is expected to stay quiet and keep paying. But for once, the script didn't go as planned. The questions landed. The contradictions were exposed. And the answers weren't nearly enough. If this moment proved anything, it's that accountability doesn't come from inside the system. It comes when people on the outside demand it. If a government agency can ask for tens of billions without receipts, it's up to the public to insist on answers. If sports empires can rely on taxpayer subsidies while making billions, it's up to viewers like you to recognize the imbalance. And if surveillance programs can quietly expand without oversight, it's up to all of us to shine a light where they'd rather we didn't look. Here's the bottom line. This hearing wasn't about partisan theater. It wasn't about scoring points or headlines. It was about whether ordinary people still have the power to demand transparency from those who govern. Because if we stop asking questions, if we stop pushing back, then the billions keep vanishing, the liberties keep shrinking, and the game is over before we even realize it. And that's where you come in. If you're tired of blank checks, tired of excuses, and tired of government waste disguised as security, then hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the stories they'd rather you ignore. And if you want to go even deeper, join us on Patreon to support fearless, independent commentary that actually asks the hard questions. Because if no one else is going to hold power accountable, then we have to do it together.